The House will please come to order. I'll let everybody get a chance to take their seat. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 13th day of the session, Wednesday, February 28th, 2024. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Convening roll call for the 13th day, February 28th, 2024. Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart?
Excused.
Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Clouston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp?
Excused.
Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup?
Excused.
Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storr? Strock? Stivar? Tarver?
Excused.
Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Speaker Summers?
Here.
Northrup? Knapp? Tarver? 61 present, 1 excused.
The prayer today will be provided by Reverend Todd Scranton from the First Methodist Church of Cheyenne. Please rise.
Please be with me in an attitude of prayer. Lord of all, as we gather this day, we offer you our best intentions for the work you have given us to do. Receive them, redeem them, and be present in them so that in whatever we do, your will be done. Should we miss the mark, transform our efforts that they would achieve the best outcomes for the people you've called us to serve. When we are tempted to be satisfied with meeting the expectations we've set for ourselves, set our sights higher so we might meet the potential you've called us to discover. May our work be fruitful and of benefit not just to us, but to your creation. May we heed your direction and follow your will, not with grumbling and reluctance, but with joy and enthusiasm. And whatever we do this day, what we say or think, where we go and where we are, may it reflect our love for you and all of the people you have made in your image. We pray in your sovereign and merciful name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend, for the prayer. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Play ball!
Well, what no. This is oh, that's right. You don't. Have a good day. Thank you.
The House will please come to order. All right, if everybody could find their seats. I think we're going to have a few privileges. I think it's a good sign that we still want to greet each other after 3 weeks. So that's, I appreciate that. That's a good deal. Representative Allred, do you have a privilege?
Mr. Speaker, privileges of the floor.
Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to draw your attention to the south balcony. Would you people please stand up? Here we have 14 Eagle Scouts from all over the state and 6,000 plus hours of community service. Let's give them a big hand.
Eagle Scouts, welcome to the house, and thank you to those adults that do the hard work to make these young people better. So thank you to the sponsors as well. Representative Ottman, are you on deck? Privilege?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor, please.
Please.
Okay. In our West Gallery, we have today Kristen Benson and Jerry Prigine from Riverton Job Corps. Riverton Job Corps is a wonderful opportunity for youth in Wyoming and around the nation, but primarily we would like to fill it up with tradespeople out of Wyoming. It was established in 1964. Out of 120 around the nations, this is the newest and probably the last. They have over 3 million graduates. In fact, I know last week there was 40 graduates from 8 different trades. So they do the heavy equipment, truck driving, carpentry, electrical, and it's a wonderful opportunity for young people from 16 to 24. And they can live on premise. Students can earn a high school diploma or the equivalent, college credits, Job Corps tuition free to eligible young people, provide housing, meals, basic medical care. When they leave, they will have their diploma, a trade, and a job. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and we just wanted to make sure that Wyoming knows all about it. Thank you.
Job Corps of Wyoming, welcome to the House. And I think one of the takeaways from that presentation is take that back to your communities and spread the word so these folks can get more Wyomingites in their program. And so it is really a great program and a wonderful opportunity for children or for students. With that, do we have any other privileges? Don't see any. All right. We're at that order of business of Senate files on first reading. Yes, Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 27th, 2024 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Chestick and Ward.
Okay, now we are at that order of business of Senate files on first reading. So you probably, maybe not remember last night when we had the messages from the Senate, and it went on a long, long time. I think there were 40-some bills that the Senate dropped yesterday. And so what you're going to see now is a lot of those bills, so it's going to take a while to roll through these introductions. The first Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 53.
Senate File 53, sponsored by Senator Landon.
First reading of the bill.
6th Judicial District, number of judges.
Senate File 53 is referred to Committee Number 1 Judiciary. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 73.
Senate File 73, sponsored by Senator Barlow.
First reading of the bill.
Concealed firearms permit eligibility.
Senate File 73 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 123.
Senate File 123, sponsored by Senator Kinski.
First reading of the bill.
Minor name changes.
Senate File 123 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. The next bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 2.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz.
First reading of the bill.
Foreign adversaries, prohibited property ownership.
Senate Joint Resolution 2 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 64.
Senate File 64 is sponsored by Select Federal Natural Resource Management.
First reading of the bill.
Mineral royalties, proportional severance tax refunds.
Senate File 64 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 75.
Senate File 75, sponsored by Water.
First reading of the bill.
Omnibus Water Bill Construction.
Senate File 75 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 77.
Senate File 77, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
First reading of the bill.
Homeland Defense, Infrastructure Reporting and Investigating.
Senate File 77 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 102.
Senate File 102, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz.
First reading of the bill.
Foreign property ownership, critical infrastructure.
Senate File 102 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 54.
Senate File 54, sponsored by Revenue.
First reading of the bill.
Homeowner tax exemption.
Senate File 54 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 68.
Senate File 68, sponsored by Senator McEwen.
First reading of the bill.
Tangible personal property tax exemption.
Senate File 68 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 19.
Senate File 19, sponsored by Education.
First reading of the bill.
Developmental preschool funding.
Senate File 19 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 82.
Senate File 82, sponsored by Senator Brennan.
First reading of the bill.
Summer Vacation Preservation Act.
Senate File 82 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 86.
Senate File 86, sponsored by Senator Kolb.
First reading of the bill.
School safety and security funding.
Senate File 86 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 83.
Senate File 83, sponsored by Management Council.
First reading of the bill.
Revisers Bill.
Senate File 83 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 72.
Senate File 72, sponsored by Senator Case.
First reading of the bill.
Utility donations.
Senate File 72 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 109.
Senate File 109, sponsored by Senator Beitman.
First reading of the bill.
Prohibited Red Flag Gun Seizure Act.
Senate File 109 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 111.
Senate File 111, sponsored by Senator Driscoll.
First reading of the bill.
Mule and whitetail deer, separate hunting seasons.
Senate File 111 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 118.
Senate File 118, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
First reading of the bill.
Bighorn and domestic sheep relocation, federal action.
Senate File 118 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 125.
Senate File 125, sponsored by Senator Driscoll.
First reading of the bill.
Parimutuel wagering activities, amendments.
Senate File 125 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 23.
Senate File 23, sponsored by corporations.
First reading of the bill.
Public utilities, energy resource procurement.
Senate File 23 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 24.
Senate File 24, sponsored by Corporations.
First reading of the bill.
Public Service Commission, Integrated Resource Plans.
Senate File 24 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 25.
Senate File 25, sponsored by Corporations.
First reading of the bill.
Reclamation and decommissioning costs.
Senate File 25 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 51.
Senate File 51, sponsored by Blockchain.
First reading of the bill.
Unlawful dissemination of misleading synthetic media.
Senate File 51 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 74.
Senate File 74, sponsored by Senator Cooper.
First reading of the bill.
Special districts, reversal of dissolution for noncompliance.
Senate File 74 is referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 89.
Senate File 89, sponsored by Senator Cooper.
First reading of the bill.
Veterans ad valorem exemption amount.
Senate File 89 is referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 96.
Senate File 96, sponsored by Senator Rothfuss.
First reading of the bill.
Trusts and bank assets in bankruptcy clarification.
Senate File 96 is referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 41.
Senate File 41, sponsored by Minerals.
First reading of the bill.
Banking Division, classification and salary exemptions.
Senate File 41 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 42.
Senate File 42, sponsored by Minerals.
First reading of the bill.
Low carbon, reliable energy standards amendments.
Senate File 42 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 52.
Senate File 52, sponsored by Blockchain.
First reading of the bill.
Wyoming Stable Token Act amendments.
Senate File 52 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 57.
Senate File 57, sponsored by Senator Murphy.
First reading of the bill.
Wyoming Adult Hearing Aid Program.
Senate File 57 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 69.
Senate File 69, sponsored by Senator Landon.
First reading of the bill.
Hospice care reimbursements.
Senate File 69 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor. We're at that order of business of bills on second reading. The first Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 5. The reading clerk will read the bill.
Senate File 5, sponsored by Labor, Organ Transplant Recipient Protection.
Senate File 5, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 9.
Senate File 9, sponsored by Education, Parental Rights and Education 1.
We have amendments. Second reading amendment number 1 appears to be Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 9 and ask for your favorable introduction. This is a conversation we had yesterday on defining these terms. We had a standing committee amendment that caused some controversy on what exactly health screening as well as questionnaires were, and there was some disagreement on what they were. So we actually had it in a different piece of legislation. These actually defined terms. That piece of legislation is no longer with us, but as I was working with LSO on finding the correct terminology and correct definitions, they had already researched them and had them prepared for a separate piece of legislation. So I included them here, and that way we all know what we're talking about moving forward with these defined terms. Ask for your favorable agreement. Thanks.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Harold? No. All right, all those in favor, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the definitions. I've been working on this myself as far as the discussion that we had yesterday and how do we kind of narrow this up without making things too difficult or leaving things out. I appreciate the definitions that were brought, though I would actually ask you to vote this down, and speaking with some of the other bringers of concerns from yesterday, I think that we might have a better option. That my concern with these definitions in this location is, I forgot to bring my amendment up, but I think that they further create issues because they're quite broad, and in this section of the bill, it is talking about at the beginning of the year, parents have the ability to opt or have those things made available to them. And so with these definitions, having that stuff made available to a parent at the beginning of the school year, I think that that's a pretty difficult ask of the school nurses and the district to say that they would have to then list on their website any health care services offered, and I just think it's a little bit broad. And so I think that we can do this a little more simply in an amendment that is yet to come. So I would ask for you to be a no on this, please.
Anybody else for their first time? All right, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 9 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Chair is in doubt. All those in favor, please rise. Thank you. All those opposed, please rise. All right, second reading, thank you. Second reading amendment number 1 has failed 27 to 30. The next amendment for our consideration is second reading amendment number 2, Representative Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 9. Ask for your favorable consideration. This was the language I was talking about yesterday when we removed the previous paragraph F. This allows, make sure that we can still do the mandatory reporting and that it's not being prohibited by this particular bill. I'd stand for any questions.
Representative Haroldson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Definitely, obviously, on the amendment, physically, and for the amendment, this is going to just clarify where we don't put a gray area into our statutes where potentially we can't protect a child. So this would, if a child were to come in with obvious issues, and that's defined in those sub-statutes, they would have the obligation, not only that, the duty to tell law enforcement about it. So this is a great addition, I believe will strengthen the bill. So on and for it.
Chairman Northrup.
On and in favor, vote aye.
All right, question being called. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Second reading amendment number 2 has been adopted. We are now on second reading amendment number 3, the corrected copy, which is Representative Penn. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I move second reading amendment number 3 to House Bill or Senate File number 9 and ask for your favorable consideration. So I think that if we can, on page 4, line 9, 11, and then at the end of the paragraph, add in the word tool. So this will say, before administering a well-being questionnaire or health screening tool to a student or group of students. I think that that gives us more clarification on, we're not just talking about any time a kid falls and scratches his knee that a parent or a nurse is going to have to call a parent prior and say, can I clean this up? You know, this is more directed at, as was mentioned before, there's tools such as depression screenings, the PHQ-9s, there's drug abuse screens, there's screening tools that can be used that, in my opinion, would address more issues that potentially could further therapeutic or interventional actions. And if we're doing those types of things, parents need to be involved, and they need to say, yes, I think that that's appropriate for you to administer to my child, and I'm okay with that. So more of an opt-in perspective. So I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on in favor of the tool language. I think that that's certainly some of the concern that we heard in committee, right? The term health screening was very broad, very overgeneralized, I guess, was probably the way that I would say it. So I think utilizing the term tool, the good sponsor of this brought this forward to me this morning, and I agree. I think this is a good opportunity for us to tighten this up. You know, I will promise that I will go back and I'll check with the school nurses to see what their thoughts are on this as well. And if we need to tighten it up, even just a little more on third reading, we can do that as well. But definitely support this amendment.
Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too appreciate the term. I'm just wondering if everybody, when they're reading the statutes, would understand what a screening tool is, and is it worthy of considering putting a definition in, maybe in third reading, so that those that are administering that might know the parameters that you're contemplating.
Anybody else for their first time? Chairman Northrup.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the amendment, this is helping tighten it up. I think we still need to work on some more, but I'm understanding that we got language coming, so vote aye.
Okay, anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time? Sensing the urge to vote, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 3 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Second reading amendment number 3 has been adopted, the corrected copy. Okay, Senate File 9, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 21.
Senate File 21, sponsored by corporations. Public Utilities Net Power Cost Sharing Ratio.
Senate File 21, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 35.
Senate File 35, sponsored by Judiciary. Public Records, DOC Investigations.
Senate File 35, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. I forgot. Representative Harrelson, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor.
Please.
I would like to direct your guys' attention up to our south gallery, and if you could hold your applause, and I'm going to do a bit of an introduction. 2002, some of you guys in this room weren't born then, maybe. I'm not sure. Anyways, 2002, I had the opportunity to be a part of a group of people, a group of young students called Teen Pact, where I came to this very Capitol and did 4 days of learning about the legislative process. And I proceeded to do 2003 and was a leader in 2004. And so Teen Pact has been a part of my life from a long time. Teen Pact now currently is in 50 states. Their mission is to inspire youth in their relationship with Christ, train them in the understanding of the political process where they can value their liberties, defend their Christian faith, and engage in a culture at a time in their lives when typically they don't have much of an opportunity or care to. This week we do have 51 students with us that will be here for the next 2 more days. They've been here since Monday, and a little bit of more of an information. My daughter happens to be one of the students, so it's 2 generations of Teen Pact in the house. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Welcome to the House. It's always good to see students here witnessing kind of democracy at its, like I said yesterday, at its best and worst. But it's still the best we have. So welcome. All right, we are at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the consent list consisting of the following Senate files: Senate File 3, Senate File number 4, Senate File 15, Senate File 17, and Senate File 20 for your consideration.
Would anyone like to pull any of the bills off the consent list? Will the reading clerk please read the consent list?
Senate File 3, sponsored by Labor, State Employee Leave for Volunteer Fire or EMS, Volunteer EMS, an act relating to the administration of government, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 4, sponsored by Labor, rehiring retired firefighters, continued retirement benefits, an act relating to firemen pensions, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 15, sponsored by Transportation, acceptance of retrocession, federal military installations, an act relating to defense forces and affairs, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 17, sponsored by Transportation, Plane Coordinate System Amendments, an act relating to the Plane Coordinate System, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 20, sponsored by Corporations, electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming, an act relating to public utilities, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Having been read three separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the House? The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Clauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas?
Excused.
Nemec? Northrop? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Nicholas? Are there any changes? Oh. Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 3, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 4, are there any changes? Nyman, aye to no. Locke, aye to no. Allemand, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Angelos, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Strock, aye to no. Penn, aye to no. Rodriguez-Williams, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Knapp, aye. To no. Jennings, aye. To no. Heiner, aye. To no. Ottman, aye. To no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 46 aye, 16 no. As for Senate File 15, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 17, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 20, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bills 3, or Senate File 3, Senate File 4, Senate File 15, Senate File 17, and Senate File 20 have passed the House. We are now at that, oh, yes, Representative Larson, JT, for a privilege.
Mr. Speaker, privilege of the floor.
Please go ahead.
Members in the gallery to your left, we have, or maybe they sat somewhere else, but we have Sweetwater County School District 1 Superintendent Kelly McGovern and Facilities Director Dan Celaroli up in the gallery. Please welcome them.
Sweetwater 1, welcome to the House. We are now at that order of business of third reading the regular list. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 2.
Senate File 2, sponsored by Management Council, Legislative Budget, an act relating to the appropriations for the legislature, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Representative Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 2, and make sure, pull up the corrected copy. There was a typo in the original one, which just has to do with some renumbering, so it's not a big deal. So anyways, really, I wanted to bring this to the body for discussion regarding how much interim work do we want to do this coming summer. You know, I think there was a lot of I don't know, I was discouraged at the beginning of this particular session. We put in a lot of work, we spent a lot of time, we spent a lot of money on committee bills, and lots of them were unsuccessful, did not receive introduction. And I guess I just want to open it up for the body. Let us have this discussion, because personally, I don't want to spend that amount of money or that amount of time on bills that aren't going to be successful. And what this bill does is just essentially cut down our standard meeting time from 6 committee days to 3 committee days. And the reason I left 3 days is in there is I think it would still allow us time to address really important issues that are coming before the state, but wouldn't allow us to address issues that don't have a general consensus of the committees. So I think 3 days would be plenty. It's going to save us roughly $750,000, and I think it's money we could put back in savings and not expend in a wasteful way. And happy to stand for any questions. Please vote aye.
Representative Chestik for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment, I think the interim work that we do is the best work that we do, because we have time to think about things, discuss them, have testimony, very good discussion. And I think we need more, anything, we need more interim time, because that's when we do our best work. When we get to this session, things are rushed. People are voting on without having a chance to review and think about these issues thoroughly. So I am, like I said, I think we need to go the other direction. I'm not going to move that. I'm going to leave it the way it is, but I'm very much opposed to this amendment.
Representative Yin for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I guess neutral about the amendment, on and neutral about the amendment. Member has been here for 6 years, not the most senior, not the youngest, not the newest member, but every year that I have been here, the amount of interim work has grown. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think that there just means that there's lots of issues that we as a legislature have been asked to tackle. Even as a member of Management Council, we've gotten requests this last year where the interim committee or a council has, an interim committee or a select committee has come to the Management Council asking for an extra day. Many of you may be members of those committees where they've asked for the extra meeting. I think in some respects, that's good for us to tackle these problems. In another respect, it's asking for an extra sacrifice for each of us, especially those of us with other jobs and other parts of our life, as we are all members of a part-time legislature. So it's definitely, I think, worth having that discussion of where do we want our interim work to go? How much work do we want to be doing as a legislature? And how many bills do we want to tackle in a session? Could go either way. So standing neutral. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Bear for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment, but I do want to challenge the bringer of the amendment in his statement that, these bills that we work on in the interim are just, it's a foregone conclusion that there's a better chance that they're going to die. These things are based on the body's approval of what comes out of those committees. That's not an indictment on their work at all. It's simply what is the end result, what is the body's feeling for that end result, and we need to keep working on these things, but we need a limit. One of the things that was just brought up by the minority floor leader is that the decisions on what these committees work on is made by a small group of us. And frankly, folks, we need to change that, because the work that comes out of them is based on the work that they start on. And so we need to be looking at the entire policy of the process of what we do work on the interim. I applaud the bringer of the amendment. I think it's a good direction to go. But I'll tell you, we need to really look at the entire process of how we decide what it is we're going to work on during the interims. And it really needs to be based on what the people of Wyoming want us to work on. And therefore, this body who represent those people should be making the decision rather than a small group of us. On and for the amendment.
I'm just going to caution us about going back in time at the beginning of the session. I've let 2 of those go, and I'm not going to let another one go. So we can talk about going forward, but we're not going to talk about going back. Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. However, I would suggest it's hard to move forward if you don't have the capacity to look back. And I think the conversation we're trying to have here is looking forward in the legislative process and being able to look what we have historically done in the past. And so if I'm out of line in that line of thinking, I'd appreciate some clarification.
Representative Larson, you're correct. I just don't want to talk about the beginning of this session anymore.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I would take a little exception to the involvement of the people making the decisions for the interim topic. I know most committees open this up to the public, and it's on the LSO website, and our LSO staff now have been reaching out to try and get and understand what the public across the state, interested stakeholders, would like us to consider during an interim topic. There has to be a refining process, and at the end of the day, it really comes down to the committee, and at the very end to the chairman of the 2 chairmen of what those considerations were going to be. I would just give an example in the vulnerable adult and mental health task force. My heavens, it was a broad interest. We narrowed it down to 4 things. Somebody has to do that. And so I think when it gets restricted down to 2 or 3 things, but then you meet, historically, we've met and refined and allowed stakeholder and public input to really try to refine the topics and come out with a piece of legislation that is worthy of consideration, and more importantly, is worthy of consideration here on the floor. Historically, we've honored that process, that all of that work is done like the bill or not from its first glance. Generally, because of the work that goes on there, we accept that as something that we would, because of the work that we anticipate hearing those committee bills on the floor. If it's this body's decision to move away from what we've done historically and not give those committee bills a reasonable hearing and debate for all the work and travel that's gone into it, then this amendment is very worthwhile and warrants strong consideration. If we're going to step back onto the historical path that we've had and defer to the committee's work with the expectation that we're going to have a robust debate and let the bill survive on its merits as it has been refined by the committee and the stakeholders, committee on both sides, and the public as a whole, then I would defeat this amendment. But I think that this is really kind of a semi-policy position that the state's going, that this body needs to make, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Trujillo, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for this, pretty much maybe. Being a freshman and this being my first time observing committees, boards, task force, the floor, and voting, it's obvious the way the floor moves. And what's also obvious is that maybe if the committees were a little bit more equal representation during the interim, we wouldn't have the split so much on the floor as to passing bills and not passing bills. I did an analysis over the interim on how we voted in the beginning and where the boards and committees and task force sit. And if you want to look at that, I'll give it to you, but there's obviously a split in the House. And if you look at these committees, there is not equal representation. If we had equal representation in these committees, then maybe the interim topics would be a little bit more appetizing when they come to the floor. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Chairman Eklund, for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, so most of you know, if not, my committee certainly knows that I'm a real fan of committee work. You get a bunch of minds together, and diverse minds too. We've got citizen legislators from all over in all aspects. So I think the committee work, you'll always come up with a better product than you will individually. So I'm a fan of that, and I'll probably vote against this amendment. But I can see why it was brought. We had, if we have committees that come together, usually 14 members if they're standing committees, we come together, we leave our work, leave our families, and put together a product that won't even be heard on this floor. I think that's disrespectful to the institution itself. So I can see why it was brought. Sort of makes sense, but I think we need to plug away with what we've done for many generations before.
Chairman Northrup.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a great time for when we have committee work done in the summertime during interim. It's a great time for the public to be able to have input into it. We have people coming from every corner of the state Fortunately, our committee meetings are held mostly in Casper and Cheyenne. It's just a good time to get a lot of topics beat out. We're going to be talking about everything from buses to curriculum this year, and that requires a lot of expertise from the districts. Quite frankly, I think it's going to take more than 3 days for us to get through it in education, on and against.
Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I think we probably all want to do the best work for the people that we can. I want to be efficient. I think government can always be more efficient. And so if cutting the number of days does that for the people, then I think I would be for it. But I think first we have to answer a different question and make sure that we are working for the people in that interim period. I would suggest considering policy change on how our topics are determined. If it's a committee that's going to be working on a project or a topic, then it should be the committee that votes to determine which topics we want. And I understand that happens to a degree. We do meet, we do discuss what issues citizens have come up with or legislators have come up with and identified, and then we get to submit our requests. But what I found with this, you know, again, I'm a freshman. I have only been through this process once. But what I found is none of the topics that I submitted and several others that submitted similar things to me ended up coming out and you know, those were things that we thought were of high importance to the people. And so that I might put that forward to say, let's consider changing the process and how we determine our topics for the interim so that we can be working for the people, so that we can do the best work for them, and possibly if we can cut down to less days, then that might be a great thing. Thank you.
Let's remember the amendment we're on and try not to get too far afield of it. Representative Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the amendment, and not for or against it at this time, but certainly want to address the process at which these topics comes forward and the time we do spend. You know, I am hopefully like you getting emails daily about topics and suggestions and filtering through the portal coming into our deadline here around the corner. So I think that's really important. Ultimately, when we're crisscrossing the state and getting to visit other communities, I think it's really beneficial for us to learn about other communities, realize what's going on, find common ground, realize where we share problems and can certainly get together on solutions. I do think one reason to be on the amendment and to vote aye would be to limit the amount of time, because if we're going to spend another 6 days on each committee to only come back here in a year and get similar results, I think it would be frustrating. So I think on this one, you got to dig deep and figure out where you want to serve the people of Wyoming in your district and vote based off of those thoughts.
Representative Singh, and we really ought to touch on the amendment more than we are, so. Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A question to the bringer of the amendment. How many of these bills, if we were going into a general session, would have ended up passing? It seems as if the problem is more with the 2/3 requirement for introductory vote.
All right, we're still really not on the amendment. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the amendment, just for the body's information, so we can discuss the amendment a little more clearly, from 1997 through 2015, the legislature averaged about 100 meeting days per interim. 2016 through 2023, the legislature averaged about 150 meeting days per interim. And in that same 97 through today time period, we've averaged about 30 committees on an annual basis. Because you have to remember, we have our standing committee meetings, but we also have select committees. The legislature sets up select committees for specific topics that may only last a year or two. But over that time period, we've averaged about the same number of committees, and yet we've seen a growth in the number of committee days being attended. So just have that for a little perspective. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, I am on the amendment with those comments.
Finally, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From my part of the state, we don't get to see
what happens here in the Capitol very much. The private individuals don't get to see that. And so during the interim, when we as committees go to various locations throughout the state, people really enjoy having us come to visit. In my communities, they've been very well received. A lot of private individuals have been able to attend and see how the process works. And industry is very willing to show what's going on in their industry. The tours that we have during these committee meetings have been, for me, very, very beneficial as I learn more about the state of Wyoming and what drives our economy. If we limit the number of days that we have for committee works, will we thus limit the involvement of the public by not being able to go out to our various locations? Will it limit the input from our industries that they cannot show us what they've got going on and what their plans are? We're a citizen-led organization, but we need to be able to go out and see what's actually going on, because that's where we get our information to make these laws and statutes. So on and against this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Lawley for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can recall the days as a student at University of Wyoming, and I was in the upper level political science classes, and we had an interesting discussion among us about how long can Wyoming remain a citizen legislature. And I will tell you that on no one's bingo card was 2024. I believe that the reason for that was we didn't envision the structure of the work being done in the interim session, how it would be done and how that would extend the time the legislature had to spend on doing their job outside of the constitutional days that we're all here together in session. So again, I'm on and against this amendment. And I want to talk about the interim. Some have mentioned it. In both of my committees I've served on, we had basically a process of education at one interim meeting, another process where we took in a lot of public input on the various issues we were looking at, and then we refined legislation that we brought, and we took in that input. And at every meeting, there was public input. In fact, this to me is one of the most important things about the interim, is the opportunity for the public to actually come and give input on things that are going on. Not everyone can, from where I live, can't come to Cheyenne for meetings to have that kind of input. And I know we have online, but I have citizens that are not really online people, and those exist out there. So again, I believe for those reasons that it really is important work. We deal with very complex issues on many of our committees, most of our committees, I would say. And we have a responsibility under the Constitution to take the time to understand as best we can these issues and to hear the input not only from various industries, as one mentioned, but from the people of Wyoming. And the interim is really where they have the most opportunity for that. So again, on and against.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr.
On the amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the amendment to cut our days in half. I think a couple things. I think the process is important to this because there's been a lot of talk. We're going to all meet as a committee with your counterparts down the hall, bicameralism, 14 of us in most of these committees. You're going to pick your top topics. Now, if you read Management Council policy, Management Council then will assign the top 3 and maybe some more. So we pick those as representatives of the people, okay? And I think Wyoming is really unique in that most states operate like our Appropriations Committee. Your committees you'd serve on would just come in a couple weeks early and finish up these bills down here and start the session early. Or, so that, but for us to travel around is really unique. And then finally, we've just got 8 days left of the 67th. So this work we're going to do this interim is going to get it ready for the 68th. Brand new committees, brand new bills, all that kind of stuff. It is an election year, but I think it's up to us to control ourselves on the number of meetings. I don't like this idea of using the budget to I think don't use that money and it will revert. It's not going to get spent. It's not going to evaporate. And then finally, it was brought up by the representative from Cheyenne. And you all know the problem. It's the wholly undemocratic 2/3 vote. It is. It's not 1974 anymore, folks. And we got work to do, and it's hard to have 2/3 agree on anything. And so on and against the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Stiff for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, on and against the amendment, I think it might not achieve what it intends because we want to have good quality bills that come in front of us. And I don't think the sort of alleged split in this body is nearly as severe or black or as clear cut as people might think. We've just this session done great work on education savings accounts, parental rights, property tax relief and reform, and repeal of gun-free zones, all passed with large majorities. We are doing good work, but the committee process is working. It's not broken. We don't need to fix it. On and against.
Representative Stivar for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a question. Is that just 3 separate days of committee meetings or just one committee meeting with 3 days?
Representative Berger for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was thinking that very same question, but I'm also thinking, and I'm still neutral on this, but I'm also thinking of how important it is, because my community is very far away from here, and I too agree with when we invite our committees to have meetings in different towns, and I like going and seeing everybody and going on tours, and in my community, those meetings were attended well, and it's very important, I think, to have these interim meetings in our communities. For one day, maybe that might make it more efficient and quicker. I'm still on the fence about this, and what I'm wondering is, could we think about 3 days during the last part of the 67th, and then, or of each legislature, and in the beginning of each legislature, go back to 6 days? Maybe that's something to think about. I don't know.
Representative Storer for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the bringer's concerns about using our time wisely and acknowledging the work that does take place during the interim. I just say, as a freshman, I really enjoyed serving on the 4 interim committees I did this past summer. It did get me out and about around the state. It allowed me to get to know some of the senators better as well, who we don't actually get to see very much of during the session. And for those of us that do live in the far corners of the state, and I know that means a lot of us too, that traveling across the state just for a one-day meeting doesn't seem very efficient either. And it does feel like there's a rhythm to the interim, which is the initial meeting is kind of introductory. The second meeting is kind of debate on the issues. In the third meeting, we come to some resolutions. So I actually do think that makes a lot of sense. So on and against the amendment. Thank you.
Representative Hornock for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You all are probably a lot like me and are very, very busy. Some might be retired, but most of us probably have jobs. We probably have a lot that fills up our time otherwise. I would prefer to cut back the days we meet in the interim because I am really busy. However, that's not what I signed up for. I'm here to support the people. So if that means meeting more in the interim, if that means hearing more topics in the interim, so be it. I'll be there. So I guess it's kind of up to each one of us to make this decision, because if you feel like during the interim, you got an advance on what we were going to talk about, you got an advanced understanding of the topics that were being brought up, you got to dig into those topics a lot more. If you feel like those interim topics, if the interim committee work was beneficial to what you're doing here today and during the last couple of weeks and will do for the next week and a half, then that's the vote of this amendment. And I feel like those interim days were beneficial, so I am on and against this amendment.
Representative Locke for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know this has been said many times. And I'm always glad to cut a few bucks out of the budget. There's no doubt about that. But here at the end of the day, I will tell you that any restriction to the access, giving the people access to us, I think is a mistake. That was very critical to me. I like to think of myself I try to remind myself as many days as I can. I'm not a legislator, I'm a representative. And that access, giving those people access to us is critical. Hey, you want to cut some dollars out? Hey, I'll work for free. That's fine with me if this body thinks that's good. Cutting the days out, in my mind, no, this is critical to our Wyoming families, the people we are here to represent, giving them access. And I put a lot of energy into making sure those people show up and they have access to us. So for that reason, I'm not going to say how I feel on the amendment from that perspective. I'm probably against it. Happy to cut a few bucks, but cut access, give less time to our people to get in front of us. And not just the Wyoming families, but our businesses and the stakeholders. I think it's very important that we give them that access. Thank you.
That was the 20th member to comment on this. Representative Pendergraph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to echo the sentiments of the good representative from District 44. I don't think the number of days is really the issue, and that has maybe tainted a little bit of this process. I think it's a matter of balance more so. When I stand and vote and I look around, most of the people that are standing with me are serving on one committee. When I sit and I watch the rest stand, most of those people are sitting on 2, 3, 4 committees. I think if we had a little bit better balance, we could work out some of these issues that we all know exist during that committee. And then when a committee bill comes before this body, we would feel a little bit more like our voice had been heard.
Representative Burkhardt for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that makes me number 22. And I don't yet know how I'll vote on this, but just some things on the amendment itself, hopefully. The choice here would be 1 3-day meeting, a 2-day and a 3-day meeting, or 3 1-day meetings. And I wonder what I could get accomplished in a committee in any of those scenarios. From a personal standpoint, sure, it'd mean one way would be less travel for me, less time away from home. The other one, 3 1-day meetings, it kind of is a wash. But I think about what we could get done or couldn't get done in a committee meeting. We've tried to really push some of the issues and work them hard and that. So I wish this would have come as a second reading amendment, because I can think of things I would do to improve it. But our choice is all or nothing because it's third reading. And like I said, hopefully I'll decide between the podium and my seat of what I'm going to vote on it. But just a caution, can you get stuff done and the work that needs to be done in any of those 3 scenarios on the amount of time you put in? I think the 3 1-day meetings are almost a waste of time. By the time you get up and running and consider an issue, and then do something with it, it's kind of hard. A 3-day meeting, that's tough too. I remember we've had 3-day meetings in the past. They do wear long. So I'm still unsure. Like I said, if this was second reading, I think we could make some real adjustments and maybe make some changes that would really help the body, help our constituents, help the process. But it's an all or nothing. So my answer would be vote your conscience. Just think about those things. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Knapp for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully I'll cover a couple different things that haven't been talked about yet. But one of the issues on and against the amendment first is the turnover. In any given election year, a lot of those interim meetings are for education, for our members that are new to get up to speed, to become educated, and that's part of our job. And then number 2 is we're not a professional legislature. We're volunteer. And so the thing that I like about interims is that opportunity to talk about bold, creative new ideas. We heard one in terms of revenue this year. Energy is another one that we need to concentrate on, and education. And so those interim periods are a time that we can talk about those issues that affect most of us, and we don't have time to truly concentrate on in session. And so that's what I'd see us moving to.
Representative Jennings for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I make number 24, a good even number, 24, although this does affect 62. And so I have a couple of things that I don't think have been touched on either. This 11th hour change is a huge change. I see it as obligating future legislatures, and I'm very hesitant to do that. I would oppose if we were doing the opposite and we were increasing. I think that might be the conservative side in me. But on the other hand, I'm also going to oppose decreasing the time. This has been in play for a long time. And I would caution the members that while we see what we perceive as dysfunction inside this process, perhaps we agree with that, it's not always so. In my 10 years, I've seen it. This policy that's worked out has moved back and forth. It's the ebb and flow of how people vote people in, choices that we make. If we haven't had the time to make the policy decisions back to how we did this, I would be a big proponent of doing that. But this amendment attempts to limit into our future and our access. And it's a large change. I would urge the body to vote no on this amendment.
Anybody else for their first time? Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a question. Would this prevent Management Council from authorizing any additional meetings above those 3 days? Because we do have things that'll come up we're not even expecting now. And if this limits the ability, I just think that's the wrong way to go. As a chairman of 3 different committees in my tenure, especially the last 2 I've chaired, my third meeting is always, I've lost a day of my third meeting because all of the the select committees, right? They can't bring legislation to the floor. So we've had select committees have to appear before one of our standing committees to get that as a committee bill. And so that's taken up, almost 1 full day of our 6 days that I normally have. And I just think it's really tough. We had several times this year, and the committee that I'm not the chairman of, where we expected topics to be about an hour or an hour and a half, and we had 80 people show up unexpectedly, and they all wanted to talk, and many drove, 100 miles to come testify in person. And it's just really tough to tell them, hey, we only have 60 minutes scheduled for this topic to make all the topics today. You don't get to speak, especially those people who drive a long way. And so when we do have actually, they're not as rare as they used to be, instances where large groups of people come and want to be heard, it's really disadvantageous for us to say, we only have an hour on this topic, and you have a couple choices. You each get to pick a couple of people, everybody gets 1 minute. None of those ways seem fair now, and I think we further tighten that down and to the detriment of our constituents wanting to speak.
Speaker Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think to answer the question, I think it says 3 meetings. So I don't think you could ask for another meeting. I think that's what it does. So that's, and in my experience, ultimately, I really don't want to weigh in on this and let you folks just decide. I think it's a good discussion. It's a good debate. I think it is related to how we pick topics and how many topics we pick. And so, vote how you want on this, but I just wanted to answer that question. I think the amendment's pretty clear.
Anyone else for their first time? First time? I'd like to speak for my second time, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Yen for your second time?
Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker.
Oh, first time, okay. Sorry, Chairman Brown for your first time.
We're talking and I didn't get up, so I felt, I was obliged to. So I haven't heard a lot of committee chairmen get up, and I just want to speak as a first-term committee chairman. I appreciate the veteran chairman here who has had some time and some availability to do this over his years, but as a committee chairman coming in this year with quite of an array of things that came up this year, we certainly did our best to focus on that and really work hard over 3 two-day meetings, right? That's quite a bit of work, and I do agree that having 3 two-day meetings really puts us into perspective. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, with a little bit of latitude, I understand that you've asked us to stay on the amendment, but I think the amendment and the bringer of the amendment actually asked for the discussion based on why we saw this. And I think one of the other members talked about this earlier about a lot of the bills that were passed out of here, they were good bills and we got them through committee, or we got them through the introductory votes, but a lot of the committee bills did not. And that was a lot of work, and that was a lot of money that was invested into that work. And frankly, as a committee chairman, you take those bills personally. Those are bills that, just as much as it says a joint committee, it feels like it's your personal bill coming through. And so to have those not make that cutoff line of the 2/3 vote, that's tough. So I do think that having the two-day meetings, as the previous chairman just stated, it really does give the public the availability to come in and voice their concerns. I had a good meeting up in Douglas, and we had the committee listen to some good testimony on some people from the majority floor leaders' neck of the woods and some concerns. Wasn't even on our radar. It was not even a consideration that we talked about during our interim topic setting. It was something that boiled up throughout the summer, and we tackled it in our second and third meeting. We didn't even discuss it in our first meeting. So I think that those are the types of things that we recognize the benefit of having 3 two-day meetings. I appreciate this discussion and the willingness to have this, and the body recognizes how hard it is to work that hard to not see something come to fruition. I would say I'm on and against. I understand where the sentiment is coming from, and I do appreciate a lot of the testimony, but as a first-time chairman, I think I've recognized the value and the benefit of staging this out and making sure we hear everybody's voice and spacing that out over 2 days. So on and against.
Representative Ward for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First for a second.
Anybody else for their first time? Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think one thing that hasn't been brought up were task force referrals to your committees. And at least in my committee, being a first-time chairman, we had a couple bills come to us from a task force that we had to consider late in the process. And if you're only meeting 3 one-day meetings over the course of summer, I think it's really going to cramp your ability to take up these task force topics that come down the pike. And so if you like the task force approach and you recognize that those task forces cannot bring bills independent from a committee, this amendment would really constrain the ability for committees to take up those task force topics. So I'm on and opposed.
Anybody else for their first time? Okay, anybody for their second time? Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So members, I have been thinking about this, and thank you. I really, really do appreciate the debate, because I think this is something that I think the members of Management Council should frankly bring to Management Council. And I appreciate the discussion from the good representative from Gillette about how we assign topics, and that power right now is delegated to Management Council. I actually brought, I don't remember if it was the previous year or the year before that, the idea before Management Council where Management Council might just set the number of days that the committee meets, and that the actual committee chairs decide what the topics are themselves, and it's not a Management Council approval. In my opinion, that was frankly a better way to go, to have that power within the chairman on both sides to decide what they discuss, rather than have that be Management Council deciding what to discuss. I think the issue with that was that, one, Management Council frankly, as a council didn't like it. But two, no chairman actually came up and said that they wanted that power. So I think as members, if you want that kind of thing changed, we could do it in a rule, or really just ask management council to change their policy, because when I brought up that idea, really no one else was advocating for it in management council. So if that's something that you guys as members want, bring it to management council, bring it as a rule change. We can do it as a rule change. I think on the amendment that we have before us, I'm going to vote no on it. I think that this would be better decided as a rule change or a management council policy change. But for now, I will probably vote against it as a budget amendment change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Yin, can you take the chair again?
For your second time, we'll go to Representative Pendergrass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against, two very simple reasons. One is I don't think this is the answer to where we failed in committees, as I alluded to earlier. And the second one is a matter of practicality. Once you have paid to get everybody, the staff and all of the committee members to some location across the state, they've already got the per diem, they've already got the travel, all those other expenses are there. That second day is a pretty cheap day.
Speaker Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to, I think, set the record straight in my mind, what happens is, in fact, it is a policy of management council that we take the top three choices of the committee, and then we can add something. So, you know, maybe if you had 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 and we threw one in there and you didn't get it, that could be, but the top 3 is decided upon it. And I wasn't going to weigh in, but I am. I'm on and against the amendment. I think we need the time to work in the interim. I think one of the challenges we have that we have to face and decide is how many interim topics we choose. Not necessarily whether you get 3 or 4, the committee does, but how many we choose and whether we do them well. And I think that's frankly a larger problem. But I think we all have opinions on this. But anyway, on and against the amendment.
Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on the amendment, as far as the 3 days, and on the amendment as far as chairman, I mean, I believe our chairmen have a choice whether we work 2 days or 1 day during these interim days. And I almost like the fact that we leave it up to our leadership and trust our leaders as far as what they need to be thinking about and what they're going to do. And that's something I value, because I see it as being a freshman. I know why I'm not a chairman of a committee. And I think I'm going to put that faith into our chairman, because I trust that process.
Anybody else for their second time before the bringer? Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's really been one of the best discussions I think we've had during this session. And I think what I hear is there's a large, perhaps the majority of the people feel that this time during the interim is worthy and that we get a lot accomplished. I just would suggest to you that we can't let that fruit die on the vine, and would hope we'd consider that as we move forward.
Anybody else for their second time before the bringer? Representative Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to thank everybody for the discussion. I think it was well-deserved. It's a topic that I thought we at least needed to address as we head into interim, and that was my whole point. Whether we pass this amendment or we don't, I think it gives us some direction on what we want to do, A, in picking our topics for interim, and B, how we allocate time during the interim. I think everybody had good points, both for and against, and it was my whole point was to have that discussion. It wasn't my I never intended to create an indictment of anyone or how they voted. Really, it's a dollars and cents sort of discussion. Are we using the taxpayers' money well? That's my question. And that's really the point of the amendment. And so as we head into these discussions about our interim topics, I'm hoping we hone in on topics that we can generally agree on. Maybe we don't all vote for them, but they're ideas that we all believe are worthwhile of discussion moving forward. And that the time we spend traveling around the state, personally, I travel a lot, y'all travel a lot, that we are using that time well. Doesn't matter how many committees you are on, whether it's 1 or 4 or 2 or whatever the number is, that's time spent away from your family. And that's money out of the taxpayer's pocket, because we are not volunteers. We actually do get paid to travel. We get paid per diem. And so that's money that we are spending. My whole intent of this discussion was just to make sure we're doing that well, that we're spending the money well and we are not wasting it. And so, maybe a lot of these committee bills that we brought this last time deserve to die. I don't know. I'm not making a judgment call on that. But what I'm saying is, as we go forward, let's pick topics and let's hone it down so that our time is well spent. That's my objective. In moving it from 6 days to 3 days, that would ensure that we pick topics that have general consensus, that we're not going to bring topics that don't have general consensus, because we will be wasting time. And so that was my intent. And, vote how you will, but I think this discussion has enlightened all of us. And please vote aye.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 2 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 2 has failed. Senate File 2 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Clauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Knapp, repeat. Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? Obermuller?
Obermuller.
O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strzok? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Haroldson, no to aye. Angelos, no to aye. Jennings, aye to no. Singh, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes. Closing vote. Vote closed. 53 aye, 9 no.
Senate File 2, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 2 has passed the House. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 30.
Senate File 30, sponsored by Judiciary, Influencing Jurors and Witnesses, Judges Amendment, an act relating to crimes and offenses, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have amendments. Third reading amendment number 1, Chairman Wash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 30 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members, yesterday we had an interesting discussion about what the proper penalty might be for intimidating judicial officials, witnesses, jurors. And we lowered that with an amendment yesterday down to just 2 years, a 2-year felony. And I would suggest to you all that that's inadequate. It not only doesn't reflect the significance of what it means to interfere with our judicial process through intimidation and fear among our jurors, our witnesses, our judges. That's a very, very important area of our lives. We could be talking about millions of dollars in civil litigation. We could be talking about someone's life in a criminal process. And for some individual to interfere with that and intimidate any of these important players in that process is unconscionable. And we should never tolerate that. And so to diminish the penalty down to simply a 2-year felony, I think fails to acknowledge the significance of the crime. And so this amendment asks you to raise that back up to 5 years, make it a 5-year felony. I would much prefer that we had left it where it was at 10, but I think that a 5-year felony gives it its proper due. And as folks in Wyoming, we tend to let things stay, right? We don't change just on a whim. And so this statute's been around for longer than some members of this body have been alive, with the penalty that we changed yesterday. And that penalty was never part of our interim discussion. We heard zero testimony about the penalty in committee here in the budget session. And so I just ask the members to think about, do you really want to go home and have that conversation with your judges where you say, yeah, this year, the year we added judges to this statute was the year we decided to drop it down to a 2-year felony. I don't want to have that conversation. I'd urge an aye vote on this amendment.
Representative Oakley for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On in support. I think it was a needed and a good discussion as far as the policy of deciding where we think this falls, and I can support it being a 5-year felony. I do think 10's a little high. And another thing, I went back actually and looked at a case that we had. One, it shows the need for the bill because we charged it under terroristic threats when a judge got threatened, and which that's a 3-year, and the defendant ended up getting a 2 to 3 year sentence, so above what this 2-year is. So on balance, when I look at the conduct, we are talking about threatening or intimidating a judge. That's serious. You know, we all just have to figure out where we think that falls. But I think certainly some conduct could be appropriate for that higher penalty of 5 years. So on in support.
Anybody else? To the bringer, you want another bite at the apple? Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, if you feel like a longer prison sentence may not always be appropriate, just keep in mind that we resolve most of these criminal prosecutions with a negotiated plea. Rarely do we get the maximum sentences unless it's really egregious types of behavior. Judges will do the right thing when it comes to sentencing. And so if we have an individual case where a 5-year prison term doesn't seem to match up with a just result, the judges will handle that. Please vote aye.
All right, all those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 30 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Third reading amendment number 1 has been adopted. Senate File 30, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Allemand. Allred. Andrew. Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron. Chadwick. Chestick. Clauston. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hornock. Jennings. Repeat. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer. Strock. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin. Zwanitzer Dan. Zwanitzer Dave. Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Brown, no, to aye. Further changes? Further changes? Sherwood? Closing vote. Vote closed. 59 aye, 3 no.
Senate File 30, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 30 has passed the House. Representative Conrad, do you have a privilege?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'd just like to invite everybody, we've talked a lot in this body regarding energy and more importantly, the future of this state. I'd just like to invite everyone today down in obviously 53 and 54 to enjoy a lunch that's hosted by the Wyoming Energy Authority. At that location, you'll have them as well as the University of Wyoming's Energy Resources, Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, Geological Survey, and others. I invite you to come down and have lunch, break bread, most importantly, learn about the future of Wyoming as it relates to our energy, being the #1 energy state in the nation. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House stand in recess until 2 p.m.
Committee announcements. Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your House Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions will meet upon the noon recess in E005 to consider 2 Senate files, Senate File 22, Public Service Commission Electricity Reliability, and Senate File 79, Malt Beverage Franchise Agreements. Grab lunch and then head to the committee. Thanks.
Chairman Olson, could you come up here for a second? Chairman Northrup.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 4, Education, will meet after we grab a bite to eat. We're going to do Senate File 61, Charter School Amendments, and Senate File 84, School Facility Use Fees.
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, your Joint Conference Committee on the Budget will meet at 12:30 in the Joint Appropriations Room to begin our discussions on the budget. The first part of the meeting basically will be going through the various amendments and comparing the House and the Senate. There probably won't be much discussion over our compromises. This is kind of the introductory meeting, and then once this takes place, then we get down to the brass tacks.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, Military Affairs, will meet tomorrow upon noon recess to hear 4 files as quickly as we possibly can. Senate File 113, Senate File 89, Senate File 96, and Senate File 74.
Is anybody else? Just a second. Chairman Newsom, could you come up here, please? All right, you've heard the majority floor leader's motion. All those in favor say aye. Oh, Chairman Zwanitzer Dan, you at the mic? Okay, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. We'll stand adjourned until 2 p.m.